welcome. If you are watching and listening now, it means you have chosen to give yourself a pause, a moment entirely your own, away from the noise of the day. This is Opulent Dreams, a place where time slows down, where stories flow gently, and where sleep arrives without being called. Tonight, I have the privilege of guiding you slowly towards rest. There is nothing you need to do. Simply listen and let go. If you wish, you can support this journey with a small gesture by following the channel, liking this video, and leaving a comment telling us where you are watching from tonight. A quiet way of being present together, even from afar. For now, though, this time is yours. Lower the lights. Settle into a comfortable position. Allow your body to find its own balance. Soften your breathing. There is no need to control it. Just allow it to slow down. The world can wait. Your worries can remain outside this night. I wish you a deep, elegant, natural rest. Let yourself be gently carried. And when you are ready, let the dream begin. The late afternoon sun was slowly descending toward the horizon when the off-road vehicle left the last paved road. Before them, the desert opened up. A motionless ocean of golden dunes. The sand stretched in every direction, forming soft and sinuous hills shaped by the wind over silent centuries. Inside the vehicle, a young woman gazed at the landscape with eyes full of wonder. Her skin had the warm tone of the Mediterranean, lightly gilded by the sunlight. Her chestnut hair, wavy and soft, moved gently in the breeze drifting through the open window. Beside her, her companion drove calmly along the sandy track. Both had features typical of southern Europe. Dark eyes, soft features, relaxed expressions. They had left the city many hours before. At first there had been villages, palm groves and small oases. Then the road had grown lonelier and lonelier. Now only the desert remained. The silence was deep. There were no sounds of traffic. There were no buildings. There were no power lines. Only wind. The sky above them was immense, a clear and boundless blue. The young woman rested her head against the seat and breathed in slowly. The gentle rhythm of the vehicle over the sand felt almost like a lullaby. "It's incredible," she whispered. Her voice was barely louder than the wind. Her companion nodded. "Here time seems to stand still." The wind lifted thin threads of sand along the crests of the dunes. Small golden spirals drifted slowly from one hill to the next. The light was changing. The sun was low now and was turning the desert into a sea of liquid gold. The dunes cast long, soft shadows. After a few minutes, something appeared on the horizon. At first it seemed like nothing more than a mirage. Then the shapes became clearer. Tents. Elegant, sand-coloured tents, arranged in harmony at the heart of the dunes. The camp. When the vehicle came to a stop, the silence of the desert wrapped around them completely. The engine went quiet, and for the first time they truly felt the desert. A deep stillness. Ancient. The young woman stepped slowly out of the vehicle. The sand beneath her feet was cool and soft. The sun was touching the most distant dunes, tinting the sky in shades of orange and rose. Her companion joined her. For a moment they simply stood still. Before them, the camp looked like a small refuge of light in the middle of the infinite. The tents were tall and spacious, built from natural fabrics in cream and sand. In front of each entrance lay hand-woven rugs. Worked metal lanterns hung from small wooden poles. The light inside them was beginning to glow softly. Warm. Golden. Welcoming. A figure in a long, traditional robe approached with a calm step. The movement of the fabric in the wind was slow and fluid. A gentle smile accompanied the gesture of welcome. Not far away, a faint sound could be heard, a tinkling. The young woman turned. Beside a small wooden fence stood some camels, tall, elegant, with long lashes and patient movements. One of them raised its head slowly. The small bells tied to its bridle rang again, softly. Her companion smiled. Tomorrow morning, we'll ride them. The wind moved between the tents, stirring the fabrics gently. The air carried the scent of warm sand slowly cooling. They were led along a soft path of rugs that wound through the camp. Their tent was nearby, slightly raised on a small dune. When the entrance flap was lifted, they were both surprised. Inside was a wide and luminous room. A large bed occupied the center, covered with pale linen sheets and many soft cushions. On the floor lay thick, colorful rugs. There was a small desk of carved wood. A lantern cast a soft light that made everything warm and welcoming. Behind an inner curtain was an elegant bathroom with a stone basin and a modern shower. The young woman took a few steps inside the tent. It doesn't even feel like the desert. Her companion opened the entrance to the outside. Before them stretched a great golden dune. The light of the sunset made it almost luminous. The wind ran across the sand, tracing delicate lines. In the distance, the camels moved slowly. The camp was quiet. Some of the lanterns had already been lit, small points of light in the sand. From somewhere came the sweet scent of freshly brewed mint tea. The sun sank further, more and more slowly. The sky changed color, orange, pink, violet. The young couple sat before their tent, hands intertwined, breathing in the silence of the desert. The day was ending, but the true magic of the desert was only just beginning. The light of the sunset was slowly softening. In the desert, the passage from day to evening happens with a particular grace. It is not sudden. It is slow, almost ceremonial. The young couple stepped out of the tent and walked a few paces up the cool sand. The camp was steeped in a deep calm. The tents were arranged in a circle around a central space where thick rugs covered the sand and large cushions were placed around low tables of carved wood. Each tent had in front of it a small terrace of leveled sand, decorated with pierced metal lanterns. When the wind passed through the patterns of the lanterns, the light traced small arabesques on the ground. The young woman observed every detail with silent curiosity. The fabrics of the tents were soft and natural, cream and sand-colored, with delicate embroidery along the edges. Her companion turned slowly, letting his gaze follow the outline of the dunes that surrounded the camp. It was like being inside a natural amphitheater of golden sand. Tall, soft dunes sheltered the camp on every side. The wind carried with it a faint scent, fresh mint. From the center of the camp came the delicate sound of glass cups lightly touching. When they drew closer, they found a small table prepared for the welcome. On a large silver tray were arranged small decorated glasses and a gleaming teapot. The mint tea was poured slowly from a height, creating a thin, fragrant foam. The warm liquid shimmered in the light of the sunset. The young woman took the glass with both hands. The glass was warm. She breathed in the scent. Fresh mint, sugar, hot tea. She took a small sip. The flavor was sweet and refreshing at the same time. Her companion did the same, settling onto one of the large cushions. The fabric was thick and soft. Around them the camp continued to prepare for the evening. Someone was lighting more lanterns. Small flames began to glow one after another, like newly born stars. Beside the table was a basket with some light traditional garments, intended for those who wished to protect themselves from the desert wind. The young woman took one. It was a long, sand-colored tunic, made from light and breathable fabric. Her companion chose a similar tunic, slightly darker. They both changed slowly inside their tent. When they stepped outside again into the open air, the sky had taken on an even warmer hue. The sun was slipping behind the dunes. The golden light enveloped everything. The light tunics moved gently with the wind. The young woman lifted the fabric of the hood and let it fall back onto her shoulders. The wind caressed the fabric, creating soft movements. Her companion smiled, watching her. In the silence of the desert, every gesture seemed slower, more intentional, more present. From the camel area, the sound of the bells reached them again. They both turned. The animals had been prepared for the brief ride across the sunset dunes. Their tall silhouettes moved slowly against the luminous sky. The long shadows stretched across the sand. The wind continued to trace small waves on the surface of the dunes. The camp behind them was growing brighter and brighter in the light of the lit lanterns. The young woman took her companion's hand. They walked slowly toward the area where the camels were waiting. The sand beneath their feet was soft. Every step left a perfect imprint that the wind was already beginning to erase. The sky now was a painting of colors: gold, orange, pink, and a thin violet line near the horizon. The camels were kneeling on the sand, patient, calm. One of them raised its head slowly as the couple approached. The long lashes moved in the wind. The young woman stroked the animal's back. The coat was warm, slightly rough. Her companion gazed at the horizon. The sun had now almost vanished behind the dunes. In a few minutes, the desert evening would begin. An evening renowned for its sky. A sky without end. A sky full of stars. The wind grew slightly cooler. The lanterns of the camp glowed ever more intensely behind them. The guide made a gentle gesture, inviting them to mount the camels. The sand around them was still. The desert seemed to hold its breath. The young couple prepared for their first ride among the dunes. Just as the last ray of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, and the sky began slowly to transform into night. The camels were kneeling on the sand, still and patient. Their breathing was slow, calm. The long lashes moved barely at all in the desert breeze. The young couple approached slowly. The sand beneath their steps was soft and cool, now far from the intense heat of the day. One of the camels let out a deep, quiet sound as the young woman drew near. She reached out a hand. Her fingers brushed the animal's coat. It was warm, rough, alive. Her companion mounted first, helped by an expert hand. The camel remained still while he settled into the padded saddle covered in sand and red-colored fabrics. Then it was her turn. When she sat down, the camel rose slowly, first the hind legs, then the front ones. The movement was wide and smooth, like the slow wave of an invisible sea. For a moment the world seemed to tilt. Then everything became stable again. Now they were higher up. From that position, the desert looked even more vast. The guide began walking ahead of them, holding the camel's reins. The animals started to move, a slow pace, rhythmic, hypnotic. The sand barely crunched beneath the camel's large, soft feet. The camp fell behind them. The lanterns were now small, flickering lights among the dunes. Before them, the golden sea of the desert opened wide. The sun had just disappeared behind the horizon, but the light continued to fill the sky. A soft light, diffuse. The dunes seemed painted in warm hues: orange, copper, muted red. The young woman gazed at the landscape in silence. The wind caressed her face and slowly stirred the light fabric of her tunic. Every now and then the camel swayed gently beneath her. The movement was steady, almost meditative. Her companion rode beside her. Every now and then they looked at each other and smiled, without the need for words. Ahead of them, the guide climbed slowly along the flank of a great dune. The sand beneath the camel's feet slid gently, creating small golden rivulets. When they reached the crest of the dune, the view opened up completely. Dunes, everywhere, endless waves of sand stretching all the way to the horizon. The sky above them was still changing. The orange was turning to pink, the pink to violet. The first shadows of evening were beginning to descend into the valleys between the dunes. The camels stopped at the summit. The wind was slightly stronger up there. It carried with it the clean scent of cold sand. The young couple dismounted slowly. The camels knelt with their wide and patient movement. When their feet touched the sand, they felt its coolness. They climbed the last steps of the dune on foot. The sand was fine and slipped beneath their steps. When they reached the highest point, the world suddenly seemed silent, even more silent. Before them, the desert stretched without limits. The sun was no longer visible, but its light continued to paint the sky. On the horizon, a luminous line of pale gold remained. Above it, the sky turned pink, then violet, then deep blue. The young woman sat down on the sand. Her companion sat down beside her. The sand was cold and soft. The wind slipped slowly across the surface of the dune, creating small, imperceptible movements. For a few minutes, they said nothing. They breathed slowly. They watched the sky. The first stars were beginning to appear. At first one, then another, small points of light kindling in the blue of the evening. The desert was changing. The light of day was retreating slowly. The night was drawing near. Behind them, in the distance, the lanterns of the camp now glowed with greater strength, small stars on the sand. The young woman rested her head on her companion's shoulder. He took her hand. The wind continued to pass among the dunes. The sky grew darker and darker, deeper and deeper, fuller and fuller of stars. Soon they would return to the camp, where the desert night was waiting for them, with its lights, its scents, and its infinite sky. When the young couple returned toward the camp, the night was already taking possession of the desert. The camels walked slowly along the sandy path. Their rhythmic pace was soft and steady, like an ancient beat that had always belonged to the desert. Before them, among the dark dunes, the lights of the camp were beginning to glow. At first there were only a few, small golden points. Then, as they drew closer, the lanterns became more and more numerous. Their warm light illuminated the rugs spread across the sand, the wooden poles of the tents, the soft fabrics moving slowly in the evening wind. The camp looked like a small village of light in the middle of the dark vastness of the desert. When the camels stopped near the entrance of the camp, the young couple dismounted slowly. The sand beneath their feet was now cold. The warmth of the day had completely disappeared. The air was fresh and clean. A light wind crossed the dunes, carrying with it the scent of burning fire. At the center of the camp, The space for dinner had been prepared. Large rugs covered the sand, forming a wide circular area. Around it, thick, soft cushions invited them to sit. Some low tables of carved wood had been set with decorated ceramic plates, slender glasses, and small bowls. The lanterns hanging from the poles cast delicate patterns on the sand. Geometric motifs of light and shadow moved slowly as the wind made the flames sway. At the center of the space, a small fire burned. The flames danced quietly, producing a soft crackling. The young woman sat down on one of the large cushions. The fabric was thick and warm. Her companion sat down beside her. They both raised their eyes to the sky. Now it was completely dark, and the desert sky was revealing its true wonder. Thousands of stars, perhaps millions. Far from cities and artificial lights, the sky seemed deep and infinite. A luminous band crossed the vault of the heavens from one side to the other. A delicate cloud of light made up of countless distant stars. The young woman sat in silence, gazing at that luminous expanse. It seemed impossible that the sky could be so full, so alive. Her companion slowly took her hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally. Meanwhile, dinner was being served. The first dishes arrived on large trays. Ceramic bowls held fresh salads prepared with crisp vegetables, aromatic herbs, and a drizzle of fragrant oil. Beside them came baskets of warm bread freshly baked. The crust was golden, the inside soft and fragrant. The scent was irresistible. The young couple tasted slowly. In the silence of the desert, even the food seemed to have a more intense flavor. After a while, the main course arrived, a large terracotta pot with a conical lid. When the lid was lifted, the warm steam dispersed into the cool evening air. The scent was rich and enveloping. Warm spices, slowly cooked vegetables, tender meat that came apart with ease, all accompanied by small golden grains of soft semolina. They ate with calm, without haste. Every now and then they raised their eyes to the sky. The stars seemed to multiply with every passing minute. The young woman leaned slightly back, supported by the cushions. The fire continued to crackle softly. The wind stirred the tents. The lanterns swayed slowly. Everything in the camp seemed to breathe with the quiet rhythm of the desert. After the meal, the hot tea arrived, served once again in small glass cups. The dark and fragrant liquid was poured from a height, creating a thin foam on the surface. The young woman raised the cup to her lips. The warmth was pleasant in her hands. The sweet flavor of mint spread slowly. Around them, the desert was now completely immersed in the night. The dunes were visible only as great soft shadows lit by the light of the stars. The fire at the center of the camp continued to burn. The young couple remained seated for a long while, watching the sky, breathing slowly, listening to the wind. In the desert, the night is not only darkness, it is depth, it is silence, it is infinite space above one's head. And that night was only just beginning. The dinner had finished a short while before. The fire at the center of the camp continued to burn slowly, but the flames were now lower, quieter. The pieces of wood were turning slowly into red embers that pulsed in the sand. Around them, the camp was steeped in a deep calm. The lanterns continued to glow with their golden light, but everything seemed more silent now. The young couple remained seated for a few minutes longer, watching the sky. The more they looked at it, the more it seemed to reveal new stars. The desert sky is never completely still. With the passing of the minutes, small points of light appear slowly, one after another, as if the universe were opening up before one's eyes. The young woman raised her face upward. The sky was so full that it seemed almost three-dimensional. Some stars shone with an intense light. Others were more delicate, almost imperceptible, and between them stretched a great luminous band, a pale mist made up of countless distant stars. Her companion breathed in slowly the cool night air. The desert had a particular scent at night, a clean scent, cold, slightly mineral. The wind flowed between the dunes with a soft sound, almost like the breathing of the earth. The young woman rose slowly. Her companion did the same. Without saying anything, they began to walk beyond the circle of lanterns of the camp. The sand was cold beneath their feet. Each step produced a barely perceptible sound. Behind them, the camp remained luminous, but a few meters were enough to be wrapped completely in the natural darkness of the desert. Out there, the sky seemed even more immense. They stopped on a small dune not far away. The sand was smooth, shaped by the wind. The young woman sat down. Then she lay back slowly on the sand, looking up at the sky. Her companion did the same beside her. The sand still held a faint warmth accumulated during the day. It was pleasant. With their hands behind their heads, they watched the sky without speaking. A shooting star suddenly crossed the darkness. A luminous line, swift, silent. It disappeared after a few seconds. The young woman smiled. In the desert, time seems to move more slowly. There are no clocks. There are no artificial lights. Only the movement of the stars above one's head. The wind passed gently over the dune. It made fine grains of sand slide down the slope. Every now and then came the faint tinkling of a distant bell, perhaps from the camels resting near the camp. The sound was almost hypnotic. The young woman closed her eyes for a moment. She breathed slowly. The air was fresh and clear. When she opened her eyes again, the sky seemed even more brilliant. The stars filled every corner of the night. Her companion turned his head slightly toward her. Their hands met on the sand, their fingers intertwined. They remained like that, still, for a long time. The silence of the desert is not empty. It is full of small sounds, the wind, the sand shifting, the slow breathing of the night. The camp behind them continued to glow with warm light, but there on the dune, the darkness was total. Only the sky lit up the world. After a while, the young couple rose slowly. The sand slipped away from their light tunics. They turned toward the camp. The lanterns appeared like small stars on the earth. They walked slowly toward their tent. The fire at the center of the camp was now almost out. The last embers glowed faintly. The wind made the fabrics of the tent sway gently. When they arrived in front of their tent, they stopped for a moment. The sky above them was still full of starlight. The young woman raised her eyes one last time. Then she smiled. The desert night was only halfway through. And ahead of them, one of the most magical experiences of all was still waiting. To sleep in the infinite silence of the dunes. The flap of the tent closed slowly behind them. The desert wind remained outside. Inside, everything was still, silent, warm. The young woman paused for a moment on the inner threshold and let her eyes adjust to the soft light of the tent. A single lantern was lit. It hung from a worked metal hook near the entrance. The flame was small and quiet. It cast a golden, gentle light that spread slowly into every corner of the room. The fabrics of the walls caught that light and gave it back with a warm glow, cream-colored, sand-colored, as if the tent itself were built from the materials of the desert. Her companion moved toward the lantern and turned the flame down slightly. The light grew even dimmer, more intimate. On the wide bed at the center of the tent, the night clothes had been laid out, light and soft fabrics, pale, natural. The young couple changed slowly, moving with calm, without haste. Outside, the desert wind continued to flow between the dunes. It could barely be heard. A distant whisper that passed through the fabrics of the tent and disappeared. The young woman sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft and enveloping. She ran her fingers over the cool linen sheet. The fabric was fine and smooth, cool to the touch. Her companion sat down beside her. For a few moments they remained like that, sitting, listening. The desert at night has a voice of its own. It is not the absolute silence one might expect. It is a living silence. Every now and then the wind raised its voice for a few seconds, then fell back low and distant. Every now and then a fabric of the tent moved barely at all, producing a delicate rustle. Every now and then from outside came the faint tinkling of the camels' bells. The young woman closed her eyes. She breathed in slowly. The air inside the tent had a particular scent, something soft and warm, like ancient wood, like fabrics warmed by the sun, like the sand itself filtered through the natural walls. She lay back slowly, resting her head on the pillow. Her companion did the same. Above them, the ceiling of the tent was high and softly stretched. The flame of the lantern cast small shapes of light that moved imperceptibly, like slow clouds, like still waves. The roof of the tent seemed to breathe. Her companion stretched out an arm. She drew closer slowly. Their shoulders touched. The warmth of their bodies mingled with the warmth of the night. The blankets were light but enveloping, thin layers of natural fabric that created a soft and silent nest. The young woman opened her eyes for a moment. She looked at the ceiling of the tent. The light of the lantern was almost still now, tiny oscillations barely perceptible, like the breathing of something ancient and patient. She thought of the sky they had just left, of those thousands of stars, of the shooting star, of the silence of the dune. Everything still felt close, as if the desert had come inside the tent with them, as if there were no boundary between the interior and the exterior, between shelter and immensity. Outside, the wind continued to blow softly. The sand ran along the flanks of the dunes with a thin and constant sound, like rain, like water, like the slow breathing of the earth. Her companion closed his eyes. His breathing grew deeper, slower. The young woman remained awake a few minutes longer. She listened to the desert, the wind, the distant bells, the rustle of the fabrics. The flame of the lantern trembled barely, then steadied, and slowly, with the same slow grace of the sunset they had witnessed a few hours before, sleep arrived. Not like a switch being turned off, like a tide rising gently. First the thoughts grew slower, the images more blurred, the dunes, the stars, the cool sand on the tips of the fingers, the scent of mint tea, the endless sky. Then those too faded away, and only the sound of the wind remained, soft, continuous, infinite, as if the desert was singing softly, a lullaby as ancient as the sand, as the stars, as silence itself. The night in the desert continued to pass outside the tent, silent, deep, full of stars that no one was watching, but that kept on shining all the same, as they always have, as they always will. Something woke her, not a sound, not a movement, only a subtle sensation, as if the desert had called her name without using words. The young woman opened her eyes slowly. The tent was steeped in almost complete darkness. The lantern had gone out during the night. Only a very faint light remained, a thin thread filtering in from outside through the seams of the fabrics. Blue, cold, silent. She lay still for a few moments. She listened, the slow breathing of her companion beside her. The desert wind, quieter now than in the evening, almost still, as if even the wind were sleeping. She sat up slowly on the edge of the bed. Her feet touched the thick rug. The fabric was soft and cool beneath her fingers. She wrapped herself in a light shawl of natural wool that she had found folded at the foot of the bed. The fabric was warm, rough to the touch, scented with something distant, with ancient spices, with wood smoke. With silent movements, she approached the entrance of the tent. She lifted the fabric flap with care and stepped out into the night. The air struck her immediately, fresh, almost cold, a clean and dry cold that did not weigh on the lungs, but opened them, like drinking spring water. She stopped in front of the tent. She let her eyes adjust to the darkness. The camp around her was completely silent. All the lanterns were out. The fire at the center was now only a circle of grey ash and a few barely visible embers. The tents were dark and soft shapes in the night, still, like great stones of fabric. But above her, the sky was something impossible. She stopped. She raised her face, and she lost her breath. The sky at that hour was different from the one of the evening, different from any sky she had ever seen. During the night the stars had shifted. The great luminous band that had crossed the sky a few hours before was now positioned differently, higher, more centered, as if the universe had rotated slowly above her while she slept. And the stars at that hour seemed closer, as if the distance between the earth and the sky had grown smaller in the silence of the deep night. Small points of sharp and intense light, white, blue, some slightly golden. The young woman walked slowly beyond the edge of the camp. Her feet sank barely into the cold sand. Each step was silent. The desert at night absorbed sounds, swallowed them, as if the sand itself were made of silence. She stopped on a small natural rise of sand a few paces from the tents. From there the camp was visible behind her, dark and quiet shapes, and before her the desert opened wide, a dark ocean. The dunes were barely visible as soft shadows lit only by the light of the stars. There was no moon, or perhaps it had already set hours before. The sky was the sole master of the night. The young woman sat down on the sand, the shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her fingers sank into the cold sand beside her. It was a coldness different from that of the air, denser, more silent. The sand at night seemed almost asleep, and yet alive. She raised her eyes to the sky again. At that hour, in that absolute silence, the stars seemed to make a sound. Not a real sound, not something the ears could hear, but something the body perceived. A very faint vibration, as if the light itself had a weight, a presence. She remained seated for a long time, still, breathing slowly. The cool air came and went with a calm rhythm. Around her there was nothing, no voices, no engines, no artificial light, only her, and the sky, and the sleeping desert. At a certain point she felt a light movement behind her. She turned. Her companion had come out of the tent. He too wrapped in a dark shawl, his hair slightly dishevelled, his eyes still half closed. He searched for her with his gaze in the night. He found her. He walked toward her without making a sound. He sat down beside her in the cold sand. He said nothing. He looked at the sky and understood immediately why she was there. They sat together in the deepest silence they had ever known. The wind was almost completely absent at that hour. Only every now and then a light breath crossed the sand, silent as a thought. The stars above them continued their slow rotation, imperceptible, inexorable, as they have done for billions of years, as they will do for billions of years more. Her companion pointed to a spot in the sky. 3 bright stars aligned diagonally, a configuration recognizable even without knowing its name, ancient, familiar, like something that belongs to the memory of every human being. The young woman followed the direction of his finger. She nodded softly. Their shoulders were touching. The warmth of their bodies was the only warmth in the cold of the night. From far away came the slow and deep sound of one of the camels, a low sound, almost like an amplified breath. Then the silence returned, complete, absolute. The young woman rested her head on her companion's shoulder. He remained still, like a rock in the sand. The sky above them was motionless, and yet in motion. Everything moved, everything rotated, but so slowly as to seem eternal. They remained still for a long time, without words, without the need for words. Then, after a time impossible to measure, the young woman noticed something. On the horizon, to the east, among the most distant dunes, the darkness seemed slightly less dense. It was not light yet. It was not yet dawn. It was only the most subtle promise of light, an anticipation, the sky preparing something great, in silence, with the discretion of one who knows their own worth. The young woman looked at that point on the horizon for a few seconds. Then she rose slowly. The sand slipped from the shawl. Her companion rose beside her. They both looked at that horizon for a few moments more. Then they returned slowly toward the tent, their steps in the cold sand, the silent camp around them, the stars still bright above. When they stepped back inside the tent, the air within felt warm compared to the cold of the night. They lay down again. They drew close. The warmth returned slowly. Their eyes closed, but both of them knew. In a few hours, the desert would offer them something extraordinary. The dawn, the first light that redraws the world. And neither of them wanted to miss it. A different light entered the tent. It was not the golden light of the lanterns. It was not the deep darkness of the night. It was something new, something subtle and cold. A grey and delicate brightness that filtered through the fabrics of the tent like water through sand. The young woman opened her eyes. This time there was no hesitation. She rose immediately. With silent and decisive movements, her companion was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed. He was watching the light changing on the fabrics of the tent. They exchanged a glance. No words necessary. They dressed quickly. The light tunics of the evening before had been replaced by warmer layers, soft trousers of thick cotton, light wool tops, the shawls wrapped carefully around the shoulders and neck, thick socks inside closed sandals. The desert before dawn is the coldest place of the day. The warmth accumulated by the sand during the hours of light has completely disappeared. The night carries it away, and before the sun returns to warm every grain of sand, there is an hour of crystalline cold, of sharp and clean air, a cold that wakes the body and the mind together. When they stepped out of the tent, the camp was still steeped in quiet. But something had changed. The darkness was no longer the same darkness of the deep night. The sky to the east had taken on a different color, not yet pink, not yet orange, only a slightly lighter blue, as if someone had diluted the black with a few drops of light. The young couple walked silently through the sleeping camp. Their silhouettes moved among the quiet tents. They passed beside the circle of ash of the spent fire. They passed beside the empty rugs where a few hours before they had eaten dinner. They left the camp from the side opposite the entrance, toward the highest dunes, toward the east, toward that thin line of light that was growing slowly on the horizon. The sand was compact and cold beneath their feet. At night, the sand of the desert solidifies slightly. The cold compresses it, makes it denser. Their steps were silent and sure. The young woman walked ahead, her eyes fixed on the summit of the great dune that stood out against the ever lighter sky. The dune was tall. The flank was steep and soft. Her feet sank into the sand with every step. One step forward, half a step back as the sand gave way. Her legs worked. Her breathing quickened. Her companion followed close behind. Every now and then, he offered her a hand to get through the steeper stretches. They climbed in silence. The sound of their steps in the sand was the only sound in the world. Halfway up the dune, they stopped for a moment. They turned. The camp below them was small and silent. The tents looked like shells resting on the sand. The lanterns out, the fire out, everything still, everything waiting. They turned back toward the summit. They continued to climb. The last meters were the most tiring. The sand was finer near the crest. It slipped beneath their feet with ease. Their arms moved to keep their balance. Then, the crest. They stopped. They caught their breath, and they looked. The sky before them was something alive. The darkness of the night was retreating toward the west, like a long, dark cloak that someone was slowly pulling away. And in its place, something extraordinary was being born. On the horizon, a thin and intense line of light, almost white, almost golden, like the edge of something enormous that is about to appear. Above that line, the sky was already a cold and intense blue. Higher up, the blue darkened still further, and the brightest stars were still visible. They resisted, as if they did not want to give way. The young woman stood still on the crest of the dune. The morning wind caressed her face. It was a cold wind, direct, honest, nothing soft or gentle like the wind of the evening. This was the wind of dawn, sharp and alive. She wrapped herself more tightly in the shawl. Her companion stopped beside her, their shoulders close, the warmth shared. They looked together. The line of light on the horizon grew slowly, first imperceptibly, then with ever greater resolve. The white turned to pale gold. The pale gold spread upward, like a flame gathering strength. The thin clouds on the horizon, invisible during the night, began to appear. First as dark shadows, then as shapes lit from below. Pink, muted orange, pale violet. Each cloud became a brush on an infinite canvas. The sky was painting itself, slowly, with absolute precision, with a patience that only the desert truly knows. The young woman did not move. She kept her eyes open. She did not want to miss even a second of that transformation. She felt the cold on her cheeks, on her hands, on the tip of her nose. But it did not matter. Her companion was watching the horizon with the same silent intensity. Then it happened. The first ray. It was not an explosion of light. It was not something violent or sudden. It was a thread, a very thin thread of golden light that appeared above the outline of the distant dunes, like the edge of a gold coin emerging slowly from the sand. The young woman breathed in slowly. She held her breath for a moment. The thread of light widened. It became an arc, then a dome, then the sun. The sun of the desert at dawn is something different from the sun one knows elsewhere. It is not yet warm. It is only light, a light almost horizontal that travels grazing the surface of the sand. That strikes every grain from one side only. That transforms every dune into a sculpture of light and shadow. The eastern flank of the dunes lit up immediately, a brilliant and intense gold. The western side remained in shadow, deep blue, violet. The contrast was sharp and incredible, as if two different worlds were touching along the thin outline of every dune. The shadows stretched toward the west, long, precise, sharp as lines drawn in pencil. The young couple remained on the crest of the dune as the sun climbed slowly. The sky changed with every second. The orange deepened. The pink faded toward violet. The blue of the high sky grew warmer. The last stars disappeared one by one. The young woman turned slowly on herself. She looked at the desert in every direction. To the east, the rising sun. To the west, the last shadows of the night retreating. To the north and south, the infinite dunes lit by that oblique and golden light. The camp below them was beginning to stir. A figure moved among the tents. A lantern was relit. A thread of smoke rose straight into the cold and still air. From that distance, it looked like a dream. A small world waking up. Her companion turned toward her. His dark eyes reflected the light of the rising sun. She smiled. He smiled. No words. No words could have added anything to what they were living. The morning wind continued to blow over the crest of the dune. The sand began to move. Small light spirals drifted along the ridge. Golden grains flying in the morning light. The young woman stretched out a hand. She held it open toward the sun. The light fell on the open palm. Warm. Just warm. Like the first signal of a promise. The desert was returning to the light. And with the light, the warmth was returning. Slowly. Patiently. As everything in the desert. They remained on the crest a few minutes longer, until the sun was completely visible above the horizon, until its light had reached every corner of the landscape. Then they began to descend. Their steps in the sand were different now, lighter, as if the dawn had lightened them of something, as if they had left something heavy on the summit of that dune, and had taken in exchange something luminous, something difficult to name, but easy to feel. The sand slipped beneath their feet as they descended toward the camp. Their shadows stretched before them, long and thin in the raking light of the morning. The camp drew closer. The tents seemed more luminous now. The pale fabrics reflected the light of the rising sun. From the kitchen area, there already came the scent of something warm, of spices, of bread, of fire. The desert was waking up. Now, the scent arrived before everything else. When the young couple entered the camp from the dune side, the air had already changed. It was no longer only the clean and cold scent of the night. It was something warmer, more alive, sweet and warm spices, freshly baked bread, the light smoke of a wood fire, and above everything, once again, the unmistakable scent of mint tea. That fragrance seemed to be the connecting thread of the entire desert experience, present on arrival, present at dinner, and present at dawn too, as if the camp could not wake without it, as if that fragrance were part of the desert itself. The central space of the camp had been transformed during the early hours of the morning. The large circular rugs had been swept clean of the night's sand. New cushions had been arranged with care around the low tables. Over the tables, hand-embroidered pale fabrics had been spread. White, ivory, with delicate geometric motifs along the edges. The fire at the center had been relit. The flames were lively and cheerful in the morning light, different from the silent ones of the evening, younger, more energetic, as if even the fire had woken in good spirits. The young woman sat down on one of the large cushions, her legs crossed, her body still wrapped in the wool shawl. The morning sun did not yet have enough warmth to truly heat, but its light was already splendid, golden and oblique. It lit everything from a low angle that made it all more beautiful. The tents seemed painted. The fabric shone. Even the grains of sand around the rugs looked like small gems. Her companion sat down beside her. He rested his open hands on his knees. He raised his face toward the sun. He closed his eyes for a moment. He let the light fall on his face, on his neck, on his hands. The young woman watched him, then did the same. The morning sun of the desert on the skin is something special. It does not burn. It does not weigh. It is only light, pure and direct, like an ancient greeting, like the desert saying good morning with open hands. Breakfast began to arrive slowly, with the same patient grace with which everything happened in that place. First came the tea, poured from a height with the ritual gesture they now knew well, the thin thread of warm liquid falling into the glass cup, the fragrant foam forming on the surface, the steam rising into the cool morning air. The young woman took the cup with both hands. The warmth passed through her palms, rose along her arms. She drank slowly. The first sip of the morning, sweet, warm, scented with fresh mint. Then came the bread, not just one kind of bread, different kinds arranged on a large flat terracotta tray. Round flat bread freshly baked on hot stone, small, soft flatbreads with dark seeds on the surface, thin and crisp bread that broke with a clean sound. Beside the bread tray, small coloured ceramic bowls were brought. One contained dense amber honey, dark as ancient wood, scented with flowers that grow in arid places. Another bowl was full of thick and grainy peanut butter. A third bowl held a preserve the colour of deep red, pomegranate, sweet spices, a dense and glossy consistency. The young woman broke off a piece of flat bread, still warm. Steam rose from the soft inside. She dipped it in the honey. The honey fell slowly, dense, slow, like the desert. The first bite was something simple and perfect. The warm bread, the sweet and fragrant honey, the clean taste of the morning. Her companion was preparing his bread with care. He spread the butter with a small wooden knife. On top, he added a generous spoonful of pomegranate preserve. The colors were beautiful, the warm beige of the bread, the white of the butter, the deep red of the preserve. Like a small edible painting, after the bread came the eggs, cooked slowly in a small black iron pan over a direct flame, with aromatic herbs, with light spices, with small cut tomatoes lightly caramelized by the heat. Everything served directly in the pan, rustic, fragrant, warm. Beside the eggs came bowls of thick white yogurt. Over the yogurt, a drizzle of green oil and a few toasted seeds, and a small bowl of fresh dates, glossy and soft, sweet as natural sweets. The young couple ate slowly, with calm, without haste, as one eats when one is truly present. When food is not only nourishment, but part of the experience, part of the place, part of the moment. Between one mouthful and the next they raised their eyes, toward the dunes lit by the sun, toward the sky growing ever more blue and deep, toward the camels waking in their small enclosure. The animals moved slowly. Their tall silhouettes stood out against the morning sky. One of them rose with its characteristic movement, first the hind legs, then the front ones, the head held high, the long lashes in the sun. The bells rang softly. The young woman smiled. "They have had breakfast too," she said softly. Her companion laughed gently, a warm and spontaneous sound in the silence of the morning. After the eggs came small, thin pancakes, foldable and soft, accompanied by a bowl of pale sesame cream, smooth as silk, with a mild and deep hazelnut flavor, and more dates, and more honey, and more tea, always tea, poured with the same patient ritual. The young woman stretched her legs out on the rug. She leaned back against the cushions behind her. The sun was rising. It was no longer only light, it was becoming warmth, a gentle warmth, enveloping, like an invisible blanket laid across the shoulders. Slowly, the wool shawl became unnecessary. She folded it carefully beside her. Her companion did the same. The desert air was warming. That moment of perfect balance between the cold of the night and the warmth of the day. That brief and precious window in which the temperature of the desert is absolutely perfect, neither cold nor warm, like a temperate embrace. From outside the camp came the sound of the guide approaching, a calm step on the sand, a gentle greeting. With a gesture of his hands he explained that the camels were ready, that the last ride could begin. The best moment of the day to ride in the desert is early morning, before the sun grows intense, before the sand reflects too much heat. In those hours the light is still low and the landscape is still fresh. Every dune is a perfect contrast of light and shadow. Every detail is sharp and precise. The morning desert is a different place from the desert of the sunset. More awake, more sharp, more true. The young woman rose from the cushion. She stretched slowly, her arms reaching upward, her face toward the sun. She felt light, rested, nourished, as if that breakfast in the desert had filled not only the stomach, but something deeper, something that in cities usually remains empty. Her companion rose beside her. He offered her his hand. She took it. They walked together toward the camel area. The sand beneath their feet was already warmer than at dawn. The sun was working, slowly, inexorably, as it does every morning, as it always has. The camels were waiting, patient, as always, as if time for them did not carry the same meaning it carries for human beings, as if waiting was simply another way of existing. The young woman approached her camel, the same one as the evening before. She recognized the bells tied to the bridle. She stroked its neck. The warm coat. The animal turned its head slowly toward her. The large dark eyes. The long lashes in the morning sun. An absolute calm. Ancient, like the desert itself. The last ride was about to begin. The camels rose one after another, the wide and slow movement they now knew well. First the hind legs, then the front ones, the world tilting for a moment, then steadying. Now they were up high. The sand below seemed more distant. The sky seemed closer. The guide set off ahead of them. The camels followed with their rhythmic and patient pace. The camp disappeared slowly behind them. The young couple did not turn immediately. They looked ahead, toward the dunes lit by the morning sun. The landscape at that hour was something completely different from the evening before. In the evening, the desert was warm and soft. The colours were deep, the shadows long and velvety. In the morning, the desert was sharp and precise. The light cut every shape with surgical clarity. The crests of the dunes were perfect lines against the blue sky. The shadows were sharp as ink on white paper. The grains of sand on the surface of the dunes shone individually in the raking light, as if every grain were a small star resting on the earth. The camels walked in a line. Their rhythm was hypnotic as always, a slow and steady swaying, forward, back, forward, back, like the breathing of something much greater. The young woman held the reins with calm, her hands relaxed, her body moving with the animal instead of resisting. She had learned. In a few hours, she had learned the language of that movement, how one surrenders to something more ancient than oneself, how one lets the body be carried instead of carrying. The sun climbed. The warmth increased slowly. It was not yet the intense heat of midday. It was still the gentle warmth of the morning, but it could already be felt on the skin of the hands, on the neck, on the face, a direct and honest warmth, without mediation. The guide led the camels toward a great dune to the north of the camp, a dune that from a distance seemed the tallest of all. The flank was long and continuous, the crest was thin and precise as a blade. They climbed slowly along the less steep side. The camels did not seem to strain. Their large, soft feet sank into the sand and adapted, as if they had been built expressly for that terrain, as if every other surface were for them a compromise. The young woman felt the muscles of the animal working beneath her, an enormous strength, quiet, controlled. When they reached the crest, the view opened in all its vastness. The young couple remained still for a few seconds. The camels stopped, as if they too wanted to look. From that summit, the desert stretched in every direction, without interruption. Dunes everywhere, an ocean of sand frozen in time. Every dune had its own shape, its own inclination, its own character. Some were tall and steep, like mountains in miniature. Others were long and gentle, like sleeping hills. The morning light painted them all with the same precise brush. Brilliant gold on the side exposed to the sun, dark blue on the side in shadow. The boundary between light and shadow was exact, sharp, perfect. The young woman breathed in deeply. The air at that height was still fresh, clean. It carried the scent of sand only just warmed, a scent almost sweet, almost mineral, difficult to describe in words, but impossible to forget. Her companion turned toward her. He too was trying to memorize everything, every detail, every color, every sensation. They looked at each other, and in that glance there was everything. The evening before, the stars, the silence of the deep night, the dawn on the dune, breakfast in the sun, and now this. This moment suspended on the crest of the world of sand. They remained up there for a long time. The guide waited in silence ahead of them, with the patience of one who lives in the desert, with the same patience of the dunes, of the animals, of the wind. Then, without words, they both felt that it was the moment to begin descending. Not because they wanted to leave, but because certain moments conclude themselves, with their natural grace, like the sunset, like the night, like the dawn. The camels began to walk again. They descended along the flank of the dune toward the camp. The sand slipped beneath the large feet of the animals, small golden avalanches dispersing in the light. The camp appeared again on the horizon, the pale tents among the dunes, The lanterns out in the daylight, the rugs, the wooden poles, the familiar shapes of a place that in a few hours had become something like a home. When the camel stopped near the enclosure, the young woman hesitated a moment before dismounting. She remained seated a few seconds longer, her hands on the warm neck of the animal, her eyes toward the dunes. Then she dismounted. Her feet touched the sand. She knelt slightly beside the camel. She stroked its muzzle with both hands. The rough and warm coat. The large dark eyes watching her without haste. The long lashes in the morning sun. The bells rang softly when the animal moved its head slightly, like a greeting, like a farewell. The young woman stood still for a moment, her forehead almost resting against that of the animal, her breathing slow, the warmth shared. Then she rose. Her companion was already standing. He was watching her in silence, with a soft smile. They returned together to their tent. The off-road vehicle was already parked near the entrance of the camp. The luggage had to be prepared. Inside the tent, everything was exactly as they had left it. The large bed at the center, the soft cushions, the colored rugs, the small desk of carved wood, the spent lantern that had kept watch over them through the night. The young woman stopped at the center of the tent. She looked at all of it with calm, without haste, every corner, every fabric, every detail, as one does when one wants to take something away with one's eyes, when one knows one will not return soon. Her companion began to collect their things in silence, the clothes folded with care, the small personal objects, the wool shawl placed on top of everything else, like a last soft layer over the memories. Outside the camp, the desert continued, indifferent, eternal. The dunes did not know they were about to leave. The wind continued to shape the sand with the same slowness as always, the same forms, the same movements, the same silence. When the luggage was ready, they carried it to the vehicle. The metal of the bodywork was already warm beneath the morning sun. Someone brought more tea, one by one. The small warm glass cups passed from hand to hand. The mint tea. Once more. The last time. The young woman drank it slowly. Small sips, as if she wanted to prolong that gesture. As if in those small sips there was still something of the desert to hold on to. The guide approached with that calm step they now recognized, the gentle smile that needed no translation. They exchanged brief words, gestures of gratitude, the hand on the heart, the greeting of the desert. The young couple drew near one last time to the edge of the camp. They looked at the dunes. The sun was now higher. The shadows had shortened. The light was whiter, more intense. The mid-morning desert was already different from the desert of the dawn, as if every hour were a new place, as if time in the desert did not pass but transformed. The young woman felt the wind move her hair, the same wind she had felt on arrival, the same wind she had felt on the summit of the dune at sunset, the same wind that had grazed their sleep in the night. It was always the same wind, and yet it seemed different every time. Her companion placed a hand on her shoulder, light, warm. She covered it with hers. They remained like that for a few moments, looking, breathing, remembering. Then they got into the vehicle. The seats were warm. The light came through the windows with force. The engine started, a low and mechanical sound in the silence of the desert. Strange, almost offensive in that context, like a word spoken too loudly in a library. The vehicle began to move slowly along the sandy track. The dunes began to flow past on either side. The young woman turned toward the window. She watched the camp growing distant, the pale tents among the dunes, the lanterns, the rugs, the small camel enclosure, the tall silhouettes of the animals against the blue sky. The camp grew smaller and smaller, a small point of light and fabric in the golden vastness. Then it disappeared behind a dune, and the desert returned to being only desert, dunes, sand, wind, sky. The vehicle continued to move along the track. The rhythm on the sand was soft and undulating. As always, as on their arrival, the young woman rested her head against the seat. She closed her eyes. Behind her closed eyelids, the desert continued. The golden dunes, the infinite stars, the evening fire, the camel bells, the dawn sky, the dense honey on the warm bread, the wind on the crest of the dune. Everything was still there, inside her, intact. Her companion drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other open on the edge of the window. The wind of their movement moved his fingers slowly, like the sand on the dunes, like the stars in the sky, like everything the desert had shown them. Slowly, patiently, with the ancient grace of one who has never been in a hurry and never will be. Before them, the sandy track stretched toward the horizon, toward the first villages, toward the paved roads, toward the world that was waiting for them. But the desert remained behind them, still, silent, eternal, as if it did not notice their departure, as if it already knew that sooner or later, everyone returns, that sand has this rare and mysterious property of entering into people, into thoughts, into dreams, and staying there forever, like the stars, like the wind, like the infinite silence of the dunes.